I remember her standing in the doorway, her coat thrown over one shoulder, hair still damp from the shower, eyes tired but kind. "I'll be quick," Mom said. "Just grabbing some bread and milk. Watch over Masha, okay?" It was a Friday. And she never came back. I've thought a lot about how to start this story. Should I begin with the day I first realized adults could disappear forever? Or the moment my dad didn't come to pick me up from school? Or maybe that night I sat by the window, staring into the dark, hoping to see the glow of her bike's headlight, even though I knew she wasn't coming back? I was 11 years old. That Friday, I became an adult. Not because I wanted to, but because the world suddenly told me, "You're on your own now." At first, it felt like a joke. I even laughed. She's just late, it happens, right? 1 hour passed. Then 2. Evening came, and my little sister fell asleep on the floor next to the cat, waiting for her bedtime story that never came. I couldn't wake Dad, he was drinking again. I just waited. And then I started to be afraid. Fear doesn't hit you all at once. It sneaks up like rust. First, a tightness between your shoulder blades. Then the urge to check your phone. Then shaking hands and sweaty palms. I opened the door and looked down the hall again. Empty. No sound. Just the old elevator creaking somewhere above, and the neighbor kid running down the stairs yelling. I wanted to go outside myself. But I knew I couldn't leave Masha alone. I had to make a choice. And that was the first choice in my life no kid should have to make. Mom disappeared. Not just physically. She was nowhere, in the police station, in the hospitals, among the missing persons. Just, gone. It was like the world took her away and quietly shut the door. And I was left behind. With Masha. With a dad who was barely there. With neighbors who quickly started whispering. With a street that smelled like someone else's dinners and cold concrete. With silence in the room where her voice no longer lived. I didn't realize then how much that evening would change my life. But that's where my journey began. Sometimes I feel like we lived in a quiet movie before that day. No extra words, no noise, just a family existing for each other. Mom would wake up early, before it was even light outside. I'd hear her moving around the kitchen in her wool socks, putting the kettle on, then quietly opening my bedroom door to say, "Time to wake up, sweetheart. The eggs are ready." She never said, "School" or "Hurry up." Just, "The eggs are ready." And that said everything: love, care, morning, warmth. Sometimes I pretended to still be asleep, and she'd come sit on the edge of my bed and stroke my back. Those moments were the best parts of waking up. Dad was still working then. He'd come home late, smelling like something, not booze, no, but dust, engine oil, and the street. He was quiet but had his little habits. He'd tap his knuckles on the doorframe, 3 times. Always 3. Then he'd take off his boots and freeze, as if listening to the house. If it was quiet, he'd smile. If he heard fighting or Masha crying, he'd sit silently on the hallway stool, staring at the floor. Back then, I thought he could just switch off. Disappear without moving. Masha was the youngest, 4 years old, mischievous eyes, and a never-ending why. She'd follow me like a shadow and constantly ask, "Why don't fish fly? Will you take me to first grade? Will Mom live forever?" I answered everything, even when I had no clue. Sometimes I made stuff up. Sometimes I got annoyed. But I never said, "I don't know." I felt like if I didn't answer, something bad would happen to her. Silly kid thoughts, but they stuck with me. Our home was ordinary. The bathroom tile was cracked. The wallpaper in the living room had a pattern Mom called Soviet chic. The fridge hummed like an old man. The light above the table flickered. But it was ours. Some nights, we'd have dumpling nights. Mom would make the dough, I'd roll it out, and Masha would sneak around with raw meat, hiding under the table. Then we'd all eat off the floor, straight from the pot, because it's more fun that way. We didn't need trips abroad, new clothes, or fancy weekends. We had family. I remember once Mom said, "It doesn't matter what's in our pockets. What matters is what's in our hearts." I laughed and rolled my eyes. But now I think she was right. That was before Friday. Before the call. Before the empty hallway and sticky fear. Before everything. At first, no one panicked. It was just an evening, people get held up sometimes. Maybe she ran into someone, maybe she took a wrong turn. Mom didn't have a cell phone back then, and at home, no one needed one. Life was simpler, slower, without constant worries. I put Masha to bed, whispering that Mom would be back soon, even making up stories about her going to buy a cake. But I sat by the window. The clock showed 10:40 p.m. Then 11:15. Then midnight. When Dad came home, he already smelled like booze. At first, he didn't notice anything wrong. He sat in the kitchen, lit a cigarette, flicked his lighter. I said, "Mom didn't come back." He didn't answer. Just sat there. Then he got up and closed his bedroom door. He didn't call anyone. Didn't try to look for her. Didn't ask when she left or what she was wearing. Just poured himself another drink in silence. The next morning? I went to the police. I was 11. They didn't listen right away. They told me to wait. Asked if this had happened before. Talked a lot about grown-up matters and told me not to get involved. A week passed. Masha and I lived in waiting. Dad barely left the couch. He drank, didn't answer, sometimes got angry, sometimes cried. Then he just disappeared. One morning I woke up, and he was gone. No note, no trace. Just his jacket hanging by the door. At 11 years old, I became the man of the house, with no mom and no dad. I started lying to the neighbors. Saying everything was fine, that mom went to care for grandma. That dad was on a work trip. That Masha and I were okay. I learned to make porridge, hid debts under the rug, scavenged food at the market, where the ladies sometimes gave me change as charity. But that wasn't living. It was surviving. The hardest part wasn't the cold, the hunger, or the tired body. The hardest part was the silence. The moment you come home knowing no one is waiting for you. The moment you go to sleep and the quiet is so loud you want to scream just for someone to answer. Sometimes I dreamed Mom would come back. Walk in, smile, say, "What, you guys couldn't wait for me?" And I'd cry like a child in response, and then wake up in the dark. And then I started to be afraid. Not for myself. For Masha. I knew we couldn't keep living like that. Someone might take her away. Separate us. And then it'd be over. That feeling, like you're holding a thread, and if you let go, everything collapses, that became my new life. Not fear, but a constant trembling inside. Like walking on ice that's cracking beneath your feet. At first, I still held it together. Woke up to the alarm, fed Masha, got her ready for daycare, then ran to school myself. Evenings were for cooking, cleaning, and stretching whatever milk we had. I lived on autopilot, as if someone else was moving my hands. I even smiled at neighbors and told them I had things under control. But little by little, I started fading away. One day I was late picking up Masha. The teacher was at the gate holding her hand. Masha was crying, and I walked slowly, eyes empty, as if I didn't even know where I was. "Where were you?" she asked. "You're still just a kid, you can't do everything alone." I said nothing. Took Masha's hand and walked home. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I was scared of people. Scared of phone calls. Scared of the mailbox. Bills came every week. Men in suits came knocking more and more, asking about Mom, Dad, and money. I lied when I could. Hid. Closed windows and curtains tight. There were days I wouldn't get out of bed. Just lay there. Hours dragged like wet cotton. Outside, the light shifted, then darkness, then light again. Inside me, nothing changed. No hunger. No fear. No feeling at all. Just emptiness. Like the lights had gone out. I became angry. At Masha, the neighbors, Mom for leaving, Dad for disappearing. I yelled at Masha over little things. Then cried myself to sleep when she fell asleep. Sometimes I thought, what if I just leave? Give up? End it all? Yeah, those thoughts were there. And that's scary to admit, especially at 12. I started talking to shadows. Sometimes I sat by the window at night, whispering to Mom, "Where are you? Come back." Even in a dream. Even for a minute. Then I'd doubt myself, did she even exist? Or was it all in my head? One night, Masha said, "What if Mom just left us?" I didn't know what to say. Because I didn't know either. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me crack, my inner light breaking. What scared me most was the thought I'd get used to this. To the silence. The darkness. The fact that no one would help. I feared I'd become like Dad. Disappear without waiting for morning. But, in that darkest place, in the deepest loneliness where you have no strength to scream or hope, something began to change. It happened on a Wednesday. I don't remember the date, but I remember the morning. It was a gray, damp day, smelling of dampness and stale bread. I was walking down the school hallway, late as usual, head down, clutching a notebook with a worn cover. I barely noticed where I was going. Then someone said, "Hey, Anton." Just like that. Quiet. Unknown voice. I looked up. Standing there was a teacher I didn't know. Young, wearing glasses, tired eyes, but a soft voice, almost like Mom's. "You're in 4th grade, right?" she asked. I nodded. "We're starting a writing club. Short stories about yourself. Come by sometime." I shrugged. She nodded and walked away. Didn't push. I didn't go. Not the next day. Or the day after. But then? I don't know why, maybe because Masha was asleep and I had nothing to do that evening, I went. The room was small, a round table, a kettle humming on the windowsill. 5 kids total. Everyone was quiet. The teacher said, "Let's write what nobody else knows. Only you." She handed out paper. I held the pen for a long time. My hand shook. Then I wrote the first sentence. The day Mom left, I stopped being a kid. And I couldn't stop. I wrote about being scared, lying, waiting. My words were raw, messy, full of mistakes. The paper was wet from my hands. But I didn't care. When I finished, I realized, for the first time in months, I was breathing again. I came back the next day. And the next. I started writing at night when Masha was asleep. Stories about our building, Mom's voice, the time I stole a bun and then sat in the stairwell for an hour, too scared to take a bite. I had no idea where it would lead. But in those stories, I began to find myself again. With my memories. I started remembering who I was, not just the kid who got left behind, but the older brother, responsible for Masha. And she was waiting too. Not for Mom, but for me. Every day. One day Masha said, "You're smiling again." That's when I knew something inside me had woken up. And maybe it was still dark. But somewhere out there, the light was coming. I started waking up earlier. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I just woke up and felt, I don't want to hide from the morning light anymore. I warmed up porridge for Masha, braided her hair, and tucked a small candy into her pocket. She still missed Mom. Sometimes she called for her in her sleep. But she stopped crying, because I was there. I learned how to cook soup. Not from a recipe, like Mom did, on a bone, with bay leaves and patience. For the first time in a long time, the house smelled like something real, not damp or cold, but food. Life. I stopped hiding from the neighbors. One day I walked up to Valentina Pavlovna on the 3rd floor and said, "If you ever need anything, I can bring bread." She said nothing. But an hour later, she brought us a warm blanket. I started working odd jobs. Handing out flyers, washing windows at stores, loading bags in warehouses. Sometimes adults looked at me funny. But no one refused me. For the first time in my life, I felt, I could do this. I wasn't a kid to be pitied, I was someone people could count on. Masha grew up. We joined the library. We read aloud every evening. She was learning to read, and I was learning how to be there for her. Sometimes we walked just for the sake of walking. Like we were heading toward a future that wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Writing stayed with me. My stories were read at school events. Some kids came up and said, "That's me." I realized what I went through wasn't just my pain. It was a pain many share, they just don't know how to say it. And I could say it. One day, I was invited to a contest. I couldn't believe it. Me, to another city? By train? I never imagined it. But we went, me and Masha. Just the two of us. She held my hand the whole way. When I read my story on stage, the auditorium was silent. And I suddenly knew, this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The path wasn't straight. There were days I fell apart. Yelled at Masha. Wondered why I was even trying. But then I'd go to the window. Breathe deep. And remind myself, I've already been through hell. If I survived that, I can survive this. Several years have passed. Masha is now in school, and she's made friends. She smiles in a way that shows she's learning not just to read, but to live. I'm no longer the boy who sat by the window waiting. I'm a man, not because time passed, but because the choices I made shaped me. Sometimes I think about Mom. About how much I loved her and how little I understood back then. I don't blame her. I don't search for reasons or excuses. I simply accept, she left. And that changed everything. I've started helping others. I volunteer at a center for kids who've lost their parents. I listen, help, and tell them that pain isn't a sentence, but part of the journey. Every time someone looks at me with hope, I see that boy inside myself, who once searched for the light. The most important thing I've learned is this. Life doesn't ask if you're ready. It just goes on. And everyone has a choice, to stay in the dark or to look for a way out. It's not easy. Sometimes you fall many times. Sometimes it feels like you have no strength left. But to keep going means to live. I'm not perfect. I have fears, mistakes, doubts. But I know one thing, I have my story. My story is my strength. If I could go back, I'd tell that scared little boy. Don't be afraid. You're not alone. And even if the world falls apart, you can build something new. And now, I'm building. Day by day.